Right. Welcome. Good evening. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on yet another edition of Talking Books Africa. Please let us know where you're joining in from today. Let's know your name and let's know where you're connecting from today. It's great to be back, and we have another interesting guest this evening. If you're joining from Lagos, Nigeria, it's evening over here. So let's know where you're joining from. Let's put in the chats. And if you're streaming on YouTube, please let us know in the comments on YouTube where you're joining in from. Thank you for joining. It's a pleasure to have you here. And it's a delight to have our guest author in the house. We have a very, very special guest today who we're going to be speaking with shortly. So if you haven't invited someone to join this edition, I encourage you to do so right now. So we have a few more minutes as we approach a conversation with one of Nigeria, and I dare say Africa's finest today. So make sure you share the link with a friend or with as many friends, family members, as many as possible, and let them be here and be part of the conversation that we'll be having today. Once again, I'd like to welcome you to the October edition of Talking Books Africa. So please, let's know where you're joining from. Put your name in the comment and the city that you're joining in from. Would love to read from you. All right, so Talking Books Africa. We started this as part of the commemoration of the 10th year anniversary of the Port Harcourt World Book Capital, which happened 2014. And Rainbow Book Club is actually powering the conversation. It's a monthly interview that we have here at Rainbow Book Club, and we've had it since April. So you're welcome if you're joining for the first time. And if you are not joining for the first time, then it's good to have you back. This evening, we're going to be having a very, very interesting conversation with our special guest. But let me say a few things about Rainbow Book Club. The Rainbow Book Club was founded in 2005, and it's the foremost promoter of reading in Nigeria. Rainbow Book Club is also project manager, Port Harcourt UNESCO World Book Capital 2014, and also project managers for Africa 39. Today, we have a special guest author, and that's none other than Chief Emeka Anyaoku. He's an international statesman, a diplomat, and a former Commonwealth Secretary General. It's so good to have you join us today, sir. You're welcome. I will be handing over to our interviewer today, who is Tarari Kalango. But before I hand over to her, the book that's the subject of our conversation is The Inside Story of Modern Commonwealth. And that's authored by Chief Emeka Anyaoku. A topical book in this year when the Commonwealth is celebrating its 75th anniversary. Now we have copies for sale for those who are interested in buying, so you can connect with us on any of our social media channels, Rainbow Book Club, or you could send a message to 234-803-5508579. If you're interested in copies for sale of this book, please connect with us on our social media channels or message 234. If you're calling or messaging out of Nigeria, it's 234, that's the dial code, and then it's 803-5508579. I will be handing over to our interviewer for today, and that's none other than Tarari Kalango, and she is a development professional who's based in Washington. Tarari, you are welcome today, and it's such a pleasure to be having Chief Anyaoku joining us for the conversation. You're welcome once again, sir, and looking forward to this conversation. Handing over to you, Tarari.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Osarime, for the introduction. Welcome, everyone, to Talking Books Africa October edition. Especially welcome to you, Sir Chief Anyoku. I have to say that I'm very excited for this conversation. It's an honor to be sitting here virtually with you.
Well,
And
I'm delighted to come to speak to you, Tarari.
thank you, sir. I have my copy of the Inside Story right here. For anyone who hasn't gotten their copy yet, I really encourage you to do so. But no worries if you haven't. We will be discussing some of the contents of the book, and I'll also be reading from some parts as the conversation goes along. So, Chief, to get us started, being conscious that many people in our audience, such as myself, who was born after you had you had completed your tenure as Secretary General. A lot of us in the audience may be quite young and may not be so familiar with, historical Nigeria. So, sir, could you walk us through the early years of your life, as a child, as a teenager, as a youth? What was colonial Nigeria like?
Well, I was born a long time ago. I'm now 91, so I was born in 1933 in a place called Obosi, which is now in Anambra State. And then I grew up in Obosi, Umuahia, and Abo, where I attended primary school. And from there, I went to school at Merchants of Life School in Oba. And from there, I went to teach for 18 months before going to the University College of Ibadan, as it was then called, and read classics. And after my classical studies, I was recruited by what was then Commonwealth Development Corporation. I worked there for about 3 years, and thereafter I joined the Nigerian Foreign Service, worked in Lagos for a year as personal assistant to the Permanent Secretary of the Foreign Affairs. And after that, I was posted to New York as a member of Nigeria's permanent delegation to the United Nations. And I was in New York for 3 years. Two of my four children were born in New York. And in 1966, I was seconded to the newly established Commonwealth Secretariat, where I had spent 34 years altogether, 10 years of which I was the Secretary General.
Wow, that's such an illustrious career that I know you've just summarized it into a few minutes for us. But really your life and your life of public service has covered a lot, which we will get into as the conversation goes along. But sir, I'm going to read a portion of your book from when you found out that you were being seconded by the Nigerian government. This is when you were based in the UN's, in Nigeria's permanent mission to the UN, when you were in New York, like you said, you found out that you were being seconded to join the Commonwealth. I'm going to read so that we can hear in your own words how you
Yeah.
felt about that nomination. So it goes as follows. When the instruction came that I was being seconded to the Commonwealth Secretariat, my immediate reaction was to protest and to demand what I had done to deserve that. The Commonwealth Secretariat had been in existence for barely a few months, and my perception of the Commonwealth at the time was that it was a neo-colonialist institution. Well, I can imagine that your feelings are quite different now, sir. So I'd like to ask how your perception of the Commonwealth evolved during your 34 years of service there.
Well, initially, I was reluctant to be posted to the Commonwealth Secretariat because, as you've just read, my perception of the Commonwealth at the time was that it was a neo-colonialist institution. And my main reason for that was that the Rhodesian crisis, Southern Rhodesia crisis, had just begun. The whole of Africa, including Nigeria, was expecting the British government to take military action against the rebellious minority regime, white minority regime of Ian Smith in South Africa. And the British government didn't do that. And I was a very strong Pan-Africanist. And I felt that the newly established Commonwealth Secretariat, with headquarters in London, was going to toe British government line. That was the basis of my reluctance. But then when I got to the Secretariat eventually and met the new Commonwealth Secretary General, the first Commonwealth Secretary General, a Canadian great diplomat, Arnold Smith, and I saw how determined he was to fight for the Rhodesian crisis being solved on the basis of a Black democracy. And that immediately made me change my mind that the Commonwealth Secretariat, to be headed by this man, would be an instrument for promoting the interests of the developing countries in Africa. And that was the way I found the Commonwealth. I was glad to work for 34 years, 10 years of which I was Secretary General. And so as the Chief Executive of the Commonwealth, I was in a position to determine the course of events in the Commonwealth.
And sir, this is a question that I know you've been faced with. It's really a question that has been asked of the Commonwealth since it was created, because there are many others who, like yourself back then, felt like it was just, an instrument for continued maybe British imperialism, British control. And I know that you've been asked this question. I actually came across an interview from 1997 where you were asked the same question. And here we are nearly 30 years later. I'm still going to ask,
Yes.
sir, do you feel or are you of the position that the Commonwealth is still as relevant today in 2024 as it was perhaps when you first joined, just given that, the landscape of the world has changed? A lot of the colonies have now achieved independence and have been running themselves as independent states for decades. The balance of power globally has sort of shifted away from the older colonial states of Britain and the other European powers. We're now seeing a lot of play of China and even Russia when it comes to interacting with the developing world. So, given all of that context, would you say that the Commonwealth is still as relevant today?
Indeed, I would say even more relevant, because the greatest challenge faced by the global community now is the challenge of how to promote understanding and cooperation among the countries of the world. Well, the Commonwealth, being an organization now of 56 independent countries. When I was Secretary General, there were 54 of them. Now there are 66 of them, and they are used to collaborating among themselves, establishing understanding among themselves, and given the fact that the Commonwealth represents not just about half of the world population, but member countries who comprised of the major racial groups of the world. And if they are able to relate to one another in conversation and cooperation, that is the example that the global community as a whole needs, with the growing divisions between what used to be Eastern countries and the Western countries. The Commonwealth as an exemplar in bringing the different countries and the major racial groups of the world to the habit of consulting and cooperating together is what the world needs. So the relevance of the Commonwealth as an instrument for the wider global community has, in my view, increased with the present state of the world affairs.
I tend to agree, sir, just even from, the way you've positioned it. I think something I found interesting reading your book, which was really like a history lesson for myself, was to learn how much the Commonwealth is built on this principle of consensus building, which is very different to what we see in other organizations where it's a bit more of a power toss, and some countries have vetoes, and regardless of what the general consensus is, a country can stop a decision. So I certainly found that's an approach that should be utilized more in the international relations space. And before I ask my next question, I would just like to remind the audience that you will also get a chance to ask some questions. So if Chief Anyaoku is saying anything that's really spurring, the wheels are turning in your head, please drop your questions in the Q&A box. And as the conversation continues, I'll get to that. But sir, I wanted to pick up on something you said, which was that the Commonwealth comprises of countries of a variety of racial makeup. Now, I remember that you noted in your book that part of why the Nigerian government seconded you to the Commonwealth is because Arnold Smith, who, as you said, was Secretary General at the time, specifically requested, I believe, an African who could help him dispel racial notions, myths, racist myths and notions. And I know that race has played a big part in or rather it did play a big part in your time at the Commonwealth, both in terms of the global issues like the Rhodesian crisis, apartheid in South Africa, but even in your personal experiences. So I would love if you could tell us a bit more about sort of how the race factor played in your time at the Commonwealth.
Well, as you mentioned, I was seconded to the Commonwealth Secretariat because the first Secretary General, Arnold Smith, came and saw our then Prime Minister, Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, and told the Prime Minister that he was determined to build up in the Secretariat, newly established Commonwealth Secretariat, a team of Commonwealth diplomats that would help him, and here I use the words he used to the Prime Minister, help him make nonsense of the myth of racial superiority. He wanted to build a team of Commonwealth diplomats from different parts of the Commonwealth who would help him establish the equality of peoples. And when I got there, in my years in the Commonwealth Secretariat, the preoccupation of the first Secretary General was to campaign against the white racist minority regime in Southern Rhodesia. And that campaign continued even after him. And the second Secretary General took it on, and the Rhodesian became Zimbabwe, just on the eve of my succeeding the second Secretary General. And then, of course, I had to deal with the situation in South Africa, the apartheid situation. Before my time, the Commonwealth had been leading the international campaign against apartheid. When I became Secretary General, I said to Commonwealth heads of government at their meeting in Zimbabwe, in Harare, that it was time for the Commonwealth to actually help South Africa, given the fact that the then apartheid president of South Africa, F.W. de Klerk, had released Nelson Mandela from prison and said he was prepared to negotiate with the anti-apartheid groups in South Africa. I said to heads of government, it was time the Commonwealth should aim at helping South Africa with the negotiations and so enable them to transit from apartheid to democracy. And the heads of government said yes. So I went to South Africa. I had a meeting with the then President F.W. de Klerk, the last apartheid president, white president of South Africa. And he launched the major conference of his apartheid government and all the groups, the four major groups in South Africa who were opposed to apartheid. I, as Commonwealth Secretary General, sent 6 eminent statesmen and women from the Commonwealth to go there during the negotiations. And when the negotiations nearly broke up because of the massacre of some ANC stalwarts in a place called Boipatong, I flew to South Africa and helped to restore the negotiations. And the negotiations went on until for 2 years. The first conference that launched the negotiation was on December 1, 1991, but it was concluded in November 17, 1993. I was there in South Africa for the conclusion of the negotiations. And so the Commonwealth played an important role in the transition from apartheid to democracy, the democratic government that was headed by Nelson Mandela. And again, in the course of the negotiations, there was a crisis that the South African police had been used to policing anti-apartheid demonstrations and protests. They were not fully aware of the requirements of community policing. I sent a team of Commonwealth policemen and women to go and help the South African police learn the art of community policing. This was, again, one of the contributions the Commonwealth made. And so when the elections took place in April 1994, I sent some Commonwealth electoral experts who went to work with the South African Electoral Commission. And thereafter, I sent a very big team of observers to go and observe the elections. And the day that Nelson Mandela was sworn in as the first democratically elected president of South Africa, we were there. I remember that when Nelson Mandela was taking the oath, tears were running down the eyes of a number of participants who were present, including my wife. It was such a moving occasion that a number of people wept, and we were all there.
You know, sir, in your biography, which I also have here with me, it's not an autobiography, so it wasn't written by Chief, but your biographer, Phyllis Johnson, notes in it that you and indeed the Commonwealth were not given as much credit, in her opinion, for your role in ending the apartheid regime in South Africa. And I recall in the Inside Story, you recounting the instances where you interacted with President F.W. de Klerk. And I think that it's so fascinating to see how when you first reached out to South Africa and said, look, the Commonwealth wants to change, well, not let's not say change, evolve our stance. So yes, you had sanctioned South Africa, you had led the call for a lot of countries to sanction South Africa. But as you saw that de Klerk was making steps to change, as you said, you suggested that the Commonwealth now look to sort of assist and aid South Africa in ending apartheid. And initially, he was very hesitant, probably rightfully so, feeling like the Commonwealth hadn't been on South Africa's side. And to me, it was such a testament to your skills and your proficiency in diplomacy that you were able to take his position from that hesitancy to a place where, like you mentioned, the Eminent Persons Group was able to go visit. The Commonwealth was even able to play a role in sort of monitoring and tracking the elections that led to Nelson Mandela being sworn in as president. And I now want to sort of touch on the skills of diplomacy that you built during your life. In your book, you mentioned some members of what you call the old school of Nigerian public service. You mentioned people like Chief Jerome Udoji. You mentioned Francis Mokedi. You mentioned Chief Adebo, who you served directly under in Nigeria's permanent mission to the UN. Chief, in 2024, the face of Nigerian public service has changed so much from what it was at that time. And I think a lot of young people have aspirations to serve their country, similarly to, what a lot of people did back then. But it can sometimes feel like there's not that much to draw inspiration from. So I would really like to hear from you on where or how you feel young people can draw inspiration from in this space of public sector in Nigeria and even across Africa and the rest of the world.
Well, the public service in Nigeria has changed. In the days of Chief Adebo, Francis Mokedi, Stanley Wade, Jerome Udoji, the civil service in Nigeria was a lot more efficient and called for dedication and commitment by the civil servants. And there was a great deal of meritocracy in the recruitment into the civil service. Meritocracy was the basis of advancement in the civil service. And the civil servants reacted to that by working hard. That has changed. Now the civil service is no longer as efficient as it used to be. Commitment to delivering services to the members of the public is no longer as high as it was then. But I would say to young people now that the development of meritocracy and encouragement of people to perform is returning. The Nigerian government now and before the present government, even before, have undertaken to revive the spirit of commitment in the Nigerian civil service. And so I would encourage young people to want to give service to the people through the civil service and expect that their hard work would be recognized and compensated.
Thank you, sir. I think it's worth noting that even at 91, you're not sitting down and resting on your oars. You are still very much active, even in, the political landscape in Nigeria. And just a few months ago, you led a group of, I believe, the Patriots, as you refer to yourself.
The Patriots, yes.
Yes, on a to see President Tinubu to discuss your calls for a new constitution. I feel like we're going slightly off topic, but sir, I would like to hear a bit about what led to that.
Well, the Patriots are a group of some call us eminent leaders of thought in the country who are committed principally to two things. First, they are committed to the unity of Nigeria as a country. Second, they are committed to advocating and finding and encouraging democratic governance and good governance. And they collectively believe that the present constitution that the country has will not produce good governance. And so the delegation that I led to see the president in Abuja 2 months ago in August, the delegation comprised of 3 delegates from each of the 6 geopolitical zones. And we went to see the president, and I, as the leader of the delegation, told the president that we were determined to impress on him that the country needed a new constitution, that for Nigeria, which is a pluralistic country means a country consisting of peoples of different ethnic groups, different religious persuasions, and so on. And I said to him, and I've said so publicly, that the lesson to be learned, Nigeria is not the only pluralistic country in the world. The world is full of pluralistic countries. The pluralistic countries that addressed their pluralism by having truly federal constitutions have survived as united political entities. Those that failed to address their pluralism by having a truly federal constitution eventually disintegrated. I give the examples of Yugoslavia or Czechoslovakia. These are countries that existed for hundreds of years as one country, but eventually disintegrated because they did not address their pluralism. In Nigeria, we should address our pluralism by having a truly federal constitution, because what we have now is not a truly federal constitution. And I hope and still advocate that Nigerian leaders in the politics and professions will eventually accept this fact in order to save our country as one political entity.
I hope so as well, and I'm sure most of us
Yeah.
tuning in would say the
Well,
same.
the signs are that the message is beginning to sink through because the National Assembly has put in place a mechanism for finding for them, they are talking about amending the constitution, the existing constitution. But I take the view that the existing constitution is not amendable because the fundamental thrust of it is not truly federal. And that's why I think we need a constitution that will be determined by directly elected representatives of the people to make the Constitution. The Constitution we have now was given, some would say imposed on the country by the military government that we had. We need a Constitution to be made by representatives of the people and then put that draft Constitution to a referendum so that the people of the country will say, yes, this is a constitution. And we will then have a true constitution okayed by the citizens of the country.
Well, we'll keep our eyes on the developments here and indeed on the news. We'll not be surprised if we see you again, sir, advocating in this space or even on other topics.
Mm.
I think that it's interesting, that the plurality of Nigeria and of Nigerian society is something that you're advocating for publicly and you have advocated for publicly, but it's also something that we see in your family, live and direct, in the marriage between yourself and your wife, Mrs. Bumi Anyaoku, who is a chief in her own right, where she's from the Yoruba ethnic group and you are from the Igbo. And I would actually like to read again from your book. You can see that I'm getting excited because I love a good romance. I'd like to read from your book some commentary from the Nigerian Sunday Times when yourself and your wife got married in 1962. The Sunday Times wrote, "It was an intertribal wedding of one of Nigeria's most eligible bachelors and a beautiful young lady educated in an English boarding school and Pitman College, London." So
Well,
this
well, this was a period when intertribal marriages were not common. And indeed, my wife's family and my family opposed the match. They were not sure that it would work. So they were saying, look, you're culturally different and so on. But of course, at that time, Nigeria meant a lot to us. The young people growing up then knew the country as one country. And my wife and I, eventually persuaded them that we were determined to be together. And they eventually accepted that. And then we got married. And next month, we'll be celebrating our 62nd anniversary. We've been married next month for 62 years. And it has worked for us. And now, of course, it's different because now many young people are getting married across the divides of tribe and so on. My only daughter is married to a young man from Benin. We are, in my family, intertribal family. And I believe that the future of our country will in part lie on such marriages between young peoples of different tribal origins.
I think it's beautiful to see how your family has extended, not just from your generation, but even going down your daughter across the different ethnic line. And
Yeah.
I can just chip in and say, similarly for myself, my parents are from different ethnic groups, and even within my wider family, we've extended to other parts of Africa. We've extended
Yeah.
as far as Jamaica, where my grandmother was from. But despite this, there are still young people who are facing either backlash or hesitation from their families about intercultural relationships. So I would love if you can speak to those sorts of people from your own experience on how you were able to practically navigate that. So how you were able to sort of bring your family aside, but even then in the marriage, work through perhaps some of the cultural differences that you might have experienced.
Yes, I think that the secret of success in marriages across the cultures lies first in the couple being true friends and true partners. Friendship and partnership is the key. And secondly, understanding each other's cultural background and having the capacity to tolerate, at the least, best embrace the cultural differences. And when you have children, one of the regrets I have is that I didn't do it. I think it would be well for the children as they grow up from infant state. They should speak, the parents should speak their different languages to the child. And the child will grow up hearing from the father one language and from the mother another language. And infants and toddlers are very good at picking up that. And they will then grow up being able to speak their parents' languages. That is one lesson I would prescribe for young people as I encourage them to marry interculturally.
Thank you, sir. I really appreciate that it's practical, actionable advice.
Well, I hope that when you do get married, that you should not be discouraged by the difference in culture. I think we should see that as a source of strength.
Sir, as I was reading your story, I couldn't help but feel that you marrying somebody from another ethnic group in Nigeria was almost like a tell of the type of person that you were, and indeed a sort of step up in you becoming, as Wole Soyinka described you, a citizen of the world, eventually as you grew into your role at the Commonwealth. So I will now take us a little bit back to the Commonwealth, because there are a few more questions I would like to ask over there. Again, you were in service for 34 years, leading the organization for 10 years. So within those 10 years as Secretary General, what do you feel were perhaps the high points, low points for you, perhaps what was a very difficult decision that you had to make as Secretary General? What is the achievement that you're most proud of during that time? And I dare ask, if you could go back and do anything different, would you?
Well, let me tell you, when I was elected Secretary General, I took 5 months of stay in Obosi, which is my ancestral home, working out what my mission would be. And I decided to make my mission 2 principal objectives. First was to make the Commonwealth an agent for promoting democracy and good governance. At that time that I became Secretary General, there were 10 members of the Commonwealth that could not be described as democratic because they were either under military rule or had a one-party state. So I made it my mission to change that as much as I could. And the other mission I did myself was to promote practical cooperation, technical cooperation among Commonwealth countries. And of course, thirdly, I was determined that the Commonwealth should be able to help its member states deal with their internal conflicts. Because to intervene in the domestic affairs of an independent country, it's not an easy thing.
Yes.
Well, how far did I achieve that? I was able to help, starting with the member countries that were one-party states. I was able to talk extensively with their presidents. I had extensive discussions with President Kenneth Kaunda of Zambia, extensive discussions with President Arap Moi of Kenya, extensive discussions with President Kamuzu Banda of Malawi, extensive discussions with President Albert Roni of the Seychelles. And I was able to persuade them, and in some cases help them in the process of adapting their countries from one-party state to multi-party state. In terms of the highlights of my efforts in this direction, my role in South Africa, I would regard as one of the key achievements of mine, to help F.W. de Klerk, Nelson Mandela of ANC, Clarence Makwetu of PAC, Gacha Buthelezi of IFP, and Constant Viljoen of the Afrikaner Party, General Constant Viljoen, to help them reach an agreement that brought in democracy to South Africa was something that I regarded very dearly. You asked me the most difficult decision or problem I had to deal with. I would, on reflection, say that being part of the suspension of my own country, Nigeria, from the Commonwealth during the Abacha days, after Abacha had killed Ken Saro-Wiwa and 9 others, which was a flagrant violation of a basic Commonwealth principle. Nigeria was suspended from the Commonwealth membership. In 1995, this was in the middle of my 10-year tenure as Secretary General. That was probably the most difficult decision I was involved in. I've forgotten the other part of your question.
I believe the last remaining part was just whether you would do anything differently.
Sorry?
Whether you would do anything differently, sir.
Oh, quite frankly, no, because my efforts to promote democracy is something I believe passionately in, and that's why I want my own country now to remain democratic and to have good governance. And fighting for the equality of human beings, irrespective of their race and so on, is something I passionately believe in and would not want to change. And helping humanity to cooperate and relate to one another is something that I believe. And so I really cannot think of anything I would have done differently.
That's amazing to hear, sir, especially given that all the things that you mentioned, those beliefs and morals, you dedicated your life, to seeing that actualized in so many countries and in so many spheres. So it's been amazing really to hear from you. I'm going to start wrapping up my section so that we can hear some questions and take questions from the audience. But I do feel that we've covered a lot of serious topics, and I would like to, at least have some fun. So Chief, you're now 91. What do you like doing in your free time? What are some of your hobbies at 91 years old?
Well, I enjoy reading. I read a lot. Secondly, I enjoy keeping up to date with global affairs, world affairs. So I listen to radio and watch television, some programs on world affairs. And thirdly, I enjoy watching football matches. And I'm a very keen footballer. I was when I was young, and I still retain great interest in watching football.
Do you
So
have
these
a
are things, in addition, of course, to the social events and activities such as the Patriots that I'm engaged in.
Well, it's great to hear that you're living as active of a life, I would say, as you were even back then, and still maintaining those same interests. Chief, thank you again for this conversation. It was a pleasure and an honor to be able to speak with you.
Well, thank you for the way in which you've handled your questions. You must be a professional in interviewing. So I think you're the likes of famous interviewers, and I wish you the very best in your future career.
Thank you so much. Thank you, sir. I will now check the questions that we have from the audience. We might just have time for one or two. I know that Mrs. Kalango has a question or two as well, and then we can wrap up. So I will read out this question from one of our guests, Ammonia Gasper, which says that it's been an honor to hear from you, sir, and asks you to share your perspective on the implementation of colonial reparations. It's an interesting question. Specifically, sir, they're asking who should receive those reparations and whether responsibility lies on the UK to give such reparations, or should the demand be placed on all countries that were involved in the colonial slave trade?
Well, I have followed the discussions about reparations, but they have been mainly concerned with reparations for the slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade. I think that the feeling of Africans who were moved as slaves, it's reckoned that as no less than 15 million Africans, particularly West Africans, were moved as slaves across the Atlantic to work in sugarcane and cotton farms and so on. That was a terrible, terrible experience. And that was a time when transatlantic slave trade was justified in the European countries by the slavers, pretending that the victims were not human beings like themselves. That was a period when, for example, in a cathedral in Germany, the painting of an African saint was repainted white because they didn't want to encourage the thought that Africans were equal human beings. So the anger and feeling of the descendants of the victims of the slave trade is fully justified. Whether they can get reparation for that is a bit more problematic, because the present governments of the European countries that were involved in the transatlantic slave trade seem reluctant to own up for the misbehavior of their ancestors. They said it's a different time and so on. I do not accept that, but I do hope that over time, negotiations and discussions of the subject will lead to some form of reparations. It may not be in direct payment of money to the descendants of the victims. It could take the form of forgiving the debts that those countries owe to countries that enslaved their ancestors. Or it could take some other form, but I hope that eventually some agreement can be reached along those lines.
Thank you for that response, Chief. As with the entirety of our conversation, very knowledgeable and informed, but also a very pragmatic and practical answer to the question. I will invite Mrs. Kalango to ask her question, as well, as I'm aware that we're coming to the end of our time.
Okay, thank you so much, Tarari. Chief, I have just one question. As we speak, the Commonwealth heads of governments rounding up their meeting in Samoa, and the presidents of South Africa and India are not there. They are actually at a meeting, the BRICS meeting in Russia, chaired by Vladimir Putin. And some people think that this is a sign that they consider their relationship with places like China and Russia are more important than their relationship with the Commonwealth. What do you think? Is the relevance of the Commonwealth waning?
Well, I think that BRICS, that's essentially Russia, Brazil, China, South Africa, and India. They are engaged in wanting to change the present financial system of the world, whereby the US dollar is the determining currency for global trade and global financial dealings. They think that the international financial system should be based on a more multilateral currency. And that's a very important issue with which they're engaged. And the five of them, the absence of two who are members of the Commonwealth would be a much more serious issue for the BRICS, 5-member BRICS, than for the 56-member Commonwealth. So I was not surprised that the two leaders of India and South Africa chose to go to BRICS and send their representatives to the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. I don't think that has anything to do with the relevance of the Commonwealth or their estimation or valuation of the Commonwealth importance. It's just that for this BRICS meeting, 2 out of 5 will be far more serious than 2 out of 56.
Thank you so much, sir. And before I hand over to Osarume to round us off, I just want to say a very big public thank you to you, sir, for not just today, but for your support and encouragement of the work of the Rainbow Book Club almost since we began in 2005. You read to children for us in 2008 at the UN House in Abuja. You came to Port Harcourt for a book festival in 2010 alongside the Reverend Jesse Jackson. We have called on you many times, not to talk of the times I have come personally to you and you have guided me and supported me. I'm extremely grateful and I thank you very much. I must also say, sir, that when we put together an anthology of Nigerian writers to mark our 50th independence, and I wanted the president to write the foreword to that book, you took the request to the president and President Jonathan wrote the foreword. These are just a few of the things you've done for us, for which we remain extremely grateful. Thank you very much.
Well, not at all, Coco. I believe that the Rainbow Club is doing a most important job. And your commitment to the Rainbow Club, I find very impressive. And I think that your mission, the objective of the Rainbow Club is a very worthwhile one, which I'm very happy to support and will continue to support. So I would say in the popular parlance, more grease to your elbow.
Thank you very much, sir. I'm grateful. Thank you. Over to your Sarume to quickly round us up.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chief, for joining us today. Thank you very much, sir. We're very honored you took time to join us. I have my notes here, just gleaning from the insights you shared through your responses to Tarari's questions. And many thanks also to Tarari for graciously steering that conversation. Thank you, Tarari. And of course, to Mrs. Kalango, who is the founder of the Rainbow Book Club. And you all heard it from Chief Emeka Anyaoku. The work that Rainbow Book Club is doing is very, very important. So make sure that you're part of the work that we're doing. Make sure that you keep joining. We have an equally interesting edition next month on this Talking Books Africa. And we're going to be having a guest author named Rina Usha Rungu. She's the 2024 winner of the Commonwealth Short Story Prize for the Africa region. She's also an assistant professor of literature at Harvard. We'll be discussing her story, Dite, which explores the themes of colonization, education, relationships, and so forth. So do well to join us on Saturday, the 23rd of November, same time, 6 p.m. West African time. And you can follow us on our media channels. Instagram, it's Rainbow Book Club Official. On Facebook, it's Rainbow Book Club. There's also an account on Facebook called Port Harcourt World Book Capital and Port Harcourt Book Festival. And on X, formerly Twitter, you can follow at Rainbow Book Club. So make sure you make it a date with us next month. Once again, and let's please wish Chief Emeka a happy 62nd anniversary in advance next month. I really, really delighted to have listened to you today and learned so much from you, especially with the intertribal extensions that you have encouraged all Nigerians and Africans to embrace today. Thank you very much again, Chief Emeka Anyaoku. We wish you a pleasant rest of the weekend. And thank you, Tarari. Thank you, Mrs. Kalango. And to our audience who joined on YouTube, here on Zoom and other platforms, till we see you again next month. Thank you for joining. It's goodbye from us.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
To mark the 10th anniversary of Port Harcourt World Book Capital 2014, the Rainbow Book Club presents Talking Books Africa, a monthly virtual live conversation with authors.